Glass shattered against Italian marble. 6:37 a.m. Executive Floor 42. Alexandra Hayes Morrison, the untouchable CEO who commanded boardrooms and crushed competitors, lay crumpled like discarded paper beside her throne of mahogany and power. Coffee bloomed crimson where it mixed with blood from her temple. Her Hermes bag gaped open, spilling secrets across Persian silk. Lucas Bennett's calloused hands trembled as he knelt beside the woman who'd never acknowledged his existence in 24 months of invisible servitude. Beneath scattered diamonds and business cards, his fingers found it. A pregnancy test bearing 2 pink lines and desperate ink scrawled across its surface. The second test. His breath caught. That handwriting, those delicate bones of her face, stripped of their usual armor of makeup and contempt. In the harsh fluorescent wasteland of corporate dawn, recognition crashed over him like ice water. Jesus. Alex? The name escaped his lips like a prayer to a god he'd stopped believing in 20 years ago. Lucas pressed trembling fingers to her neck, feeling life flutter beneath skin that smelled of expensive perfume and cold fear. Her pulse beat erratic against his roughened fingertips, the same nervous rhythm he remembered from Professor Martinez's ethics class, when she'd lean forward, arguing passionately about corporate responsibility. Back then, she was Alexandra Rodriguez, the idealistic business major who dreamed of changing the world one ethical decision at a time. Now she was Mrs. Hayes Morrison, ice queen of a corporate empire built on the bones of smaller companies. The elevator dinged in the distance, security making their 6:45 rounds. Lucas's eyes darted between Alexandra's unconscious form and the pregnancy test clutched in his palm. The wrapper bore medical terminology he didn't understand, but the date was clear. Today. Someone had written "Final Verification" in shaky handwriting across the top. His cleaning cart sat abandoned by the window, industrial mop and bucket suddenly seeming like artifacts from another life. 24 months ago, he'd been Lucas Bennett, MBA graduate, junior executive at Morrison Holdings' biggest competitor. Then he'd discovered the doctored safety reports, covered-up chemical spills, bribes disguised as consulting fees. The whistleblowing had cost him everything: career, savings, marriage. But it had saved lives. Dozens of them. Now he scrubbed floors in the building where his former colleagues had once sought his expertise. His daughter Zoe, 8 years old and wiser than her years, still believed her father was a hero. She didn't know about the foreclosure notices, medical bills from her own surgery that had drained their emergency fund. The custody hearing loomed next month, where his ex-wife would argue that a janitor couldn't provide stability. The irony wasn't lost on him, cleaning up after the people who'd destroyed his life. Alexandra stirred, a soft moan escaping her lips. Her eyelids fluttered, revealing green eyes clouded with confusion and pain. Lucas quickly pocketed the pregnancy test, his decision made in a heartbeat. Whatever secrets she carried, whatever had driven the most composed woman he'd ever known to collapse alone at dawn, she deserved better than having her vulnerability exposed to corporate vultures. He'd learned the hard way that speaking truth to power came with a price. Sometimes the truth needed protection until it could be safely revealed. "Mom?" His voice was steady, professional, giving no hint of recognition. "Mom, can you hear me?" "You've had a fall." Her fingers grasped weakly at the air, seeking purchase on reality. When her gaze finally focused on his face, something flickered behind her eyes. Not recognition exactly, but a stirring of familiarity. Her lips parted, and for a moment he thought she might say his name, might bridge the 20 years that stretched between them. Instead, she whispered, Don't let them." Her voice faded as consciousness slipped away again. Heavy footsteps echoed across marble as security guards approached, their radio chatter cutting through morning silence. Lucas stood, brushing invisible dust from his uniform, transforming back into the unremarkable night janitor, who happened to be in the right place at the wrong time. He'd perfected this disappearing act over months of practice, becoming part of the scenery, beneath notice, forgotten before conversations even began. "Sir, what happened here?" The lead security guard, Rodriguez, stepped carefully around spilled coffee. His hand rested on his radio, ready to call backup if needed. "Found her like this when I came to clean the office," Lucas replied, his voice carrying just the right note of concerned employee. "Looks like she slipped. Hit her head on the desk edge." He gestured towards the mahogany corner where a smear of blood confirmed his fabricated story. Truth was a luxury he could no longer afford, not when Alexandra's secrets pressed against his ribs like a loaded gun. The paramedics arrived within minutes, their equipment clattering against elevator walls as they rushed towards the scene. Lucas stepped back, melting into shadows near the window where morning light filtered through steel and glass. The city sprawled below, 42 floors down, awakening to another day of corporate warfare and buried truths. From this height, people looked like ants, their struggles invisible, victories and defeats reduced to mere speculation. "Vitals are stable," the lead paramedic announced, his voice cutting through organized chaos. "Possible concussion. We need to get her to General immediately." They worked with practiced efficiency, stabilizing her neck, checking pupils, inserting an IV with casual expertise of people who'd seen every kind of human fragility. As they prepared to move her, Alexandra's eyes opened again. This time, her gaze found Lucas immediately, cutting through the crowd of uniforms and medical equipment like a blade finding its target. Her mouth moved soundlessly, forming words meant only for him. "Thank you." The pregnancy test seemed to burn through his pocket, a paper-thin secret that weighed more than all the corporate lies he'd ever uncovered. The elevator swallowed the medical team, leaving behind only Rodriguez and the morning cleaning crew. Lucas retrieved his mop, dunking the strands in sudsy water that had grown cold during chaos. Blood was always harder to clean than people expected. "Hell of a thing," Rodriguez muttered, making notes on his incident report. "Woman like that, all that money and power, still human enough to slip on spilled coffee." Lucas nodded non-committally, wringing out his mop with mechanical precision. If only it were that simple. If only the most powerful people were vulnerable to nothing more dangerous than slick floors and morning clumsiness. But he'd seen behind the curtain, knew how the machine really worked. Alexandra Hayes Morrison hadn't slipped. She'd fallen under the weight of secrets too heavy for even her titanium spine to support. The morning progressed with surreal normalcy. Office workers arrived in waves, designer shoes clicking across floors still damp from Lucas's careful cleaning. They gathered around coffee machines, trading gossip about their fallen CEO with hungry enthusiasm of people who fed on others' misfortune. Lucas listened while he worked, invisible as furniture, collecting fragments of information like a detective, assembling clues from scattered evidence. Heard she's been working 18-hour days since merger talks started," whispered Janet from accounting, her voice carrying false concern that masked genuine excitement. "Probably exhaustion," agreed Marcus from legal, stirring sugar into coffee with elaborate casualness. "Though there are rumors about her marriage. My wife saw her dining alone at Le Bernardin 3 times this month. Richard was supposedly in Chicago for business, but—" He let the implication hang in the air like cigarette smoke. Lucas's grip tightened on his mop handle. Richard Hayes Morrison, Alexandra's husband of 4 years, was Morrison Holdings' chief financial officer and architect behind their aggressive acquisition strategy. The marriage had been front-page news in financial press, hailed as a power coupling that would reshape the corporate landscape. His phone buzzed against his hip, a text from his babysitter. "Zoe asking when Daddy comes home. Surgery follow-up appointment tomorrow at 10 a.m. Don't forget." The reminder hit him like a physical blow. Tomorrow was Wednesday, exactly 1 month since his daughter's emergency appendectomy, when he'd spent 12 hours in a hospital waiting room, watching his savings account drain 1 medical bill at a time. The surgery had been successful, but recovery was ongoing, and single fathers who worked night shifts weren't exactly swimming in reliable childcare options. The custody hearing loomed like a storm cloud on his personal horizon. His ex-wife Sarah had remarried, a pediatric surgeon with a house in the suburbs, stable schedule. None of the baggage that came with being a notorious whistleblower. On paper, she could offer Zoe everything Lucas couldn't: financial security, educational opportunities, a normal life unmarked by ethical battles and their inevitable consequences. The only thing working in his favor was Zoe herself, who'd made it clear she preferred her father's cramped apartment to her stepfather's mansion. Children had an uncanny ability to see through adult deceptions, to recognize authentic love beneath layers of disappointment and compromise. Around 11 a.m. his phone rang. Unknown number, but he recognized the area code General Hospital. His pulse quickened as he stepped into an empty conference room to answer. "Mr. Bennett, this is Dr. Sarah Chen at General Hospital. I understand you were the person who found Mrs. Hayes Morrison this morning." "Yes, ma'am. Is she all right?" "She's stable. Mild concussion, some dehydration, but nothing life-threatening. She's been asking about the person who helped her. Would you be available to visit?" Lucas stared out the conference room window at the city below, weighing his options. Going to the hospital meant potential exposure, risking the careful invisibility he'd cultivated over 2 years of janitorial work. But Alexandra's whispered "thank you" echoed in his memory, and he found himself agreeing before his rational mind could intervene. "I'll be there during my lunch break." General Hospital smelled of disinfectant and defeated hopes, a combination Lucas remembered all too well from Zoe's surgery. The elevator carried him to the 7th floor, where private rooms housed the city's elite in surroundings designed to make illness feel less like vulnerability. Room 712 sat at the end of a corridor lined with abstract paintings that probably cost more than his annual salary. Alexandra was awake, propped against pillows that looked more comfortable than his own bed. Someone had brought her fresh clothes, a silk blouse and designer slacks that managed to make her hospital gown look like a fashion choice rather than medical necessity. Her hair had been styled, makeup reapplied, corporate armor restored. But her hands shook slightly as she reached for the water glass, and Lucas caught a glimpse of the frightened woman who'd whispered desperate words in Dawn's shadow. "You came. Her voice carried surprise and something that might have been relief. "I wasn't sure you would." Lucas remained near the door, hat in hands, playing his role as concerned janitor with practiced ease. "Just wanted to make sure you were okay, ma'am." Gave us all quite a scare this morning. She studied his face with the intensity of someone trying to solve a particularly complex equation. "What's your name?" "Lucas Bennett, ma'am. Night maintenance crew." "Lucas Bennett." She repeated the name slowly, rolling it around like vintage wine. "How long have you worked at Morrison Holdings?" 2 years, 3 months. The truth, though not the whole truth. He'd been watching her for exactly that long, this woman who'd once sat beside him in Professor Martinez's classroom, passionately defending ethical business practices while coffee grew cold between them. This woman who'd believed corporations could be forces for good, who'd written her senior thesis on sustainable profit models and social responsibility. 2 years. Her green eyes narrowed slightly, searching his features for something she couldn't quite identify. "You seem familiar. Do we know each other from somewhere?" The pregnancy test burned against his chest like a guilty secret. 20 years of separation stretched between them, him falling from grace, her rising to power, both shaped by choices that had led to this strange intersection of past and present. He could reveal himself now, could bridge those decades with a single sentence, but exposure would serve neither of them. Alexandra needed protection from corporate sharks circling her empire, and Lucas needed to keep his job long enough to win his custody battle. "Don't think so, ma'am. I tend to work nights. Most executives don't see much of the cleaning crew." She nodded slowly, but her gaze remained sharp, analytical. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, heavy with unspoken recognition and carefully guarded secrets. Finally, she reached into her purse and withdrew a business card, not her official corporate card, but something simpler, more personal. "My private number." She pressed it into his palm, her fingers lingering against his calloused skin for just a moment longer than necessary. "If you ever need anything, a reference, a recommendation, sometimes good deeds deserve better rewards than just gratitude." Lucas pocketed the card next to the pregnancy test, 2 secrets now pressed against his heart. "That's very kind of you, Mrs. Hayes Morrison, but I was just doing what anyone would do." "No." Her voice carried absolute certainty. "Most people would have looked the other way, would have protected themselves first. You chose differently." She paused, studying his face with renewed intensity. "Why?" The question hung in the air like incense, heavy with implications neither was ready to address directly. Lucas thought about Professor Martinez's classroom, about ethical frameworks and moral courage, about the idealistic young woman who'd believed businesses could change the world for the better. "Sometimes doing the right thing is its own reward," he said finally, "even when it costs everything." Something flickered behind Alexandra's eyes, recognition or understanding, or perhaps just the ghost of the person she'd been before corporate America had stripped away her idealism layer by layer. She nodded once, a gesture that seemed to acknowledge more than just his words, and Lucas knew it was time to leave before either said something that couldn't be taken back. The ride back to Morrison Holdings passed in a blur of traffic and twisted thoughts. His mind churned through possibilities and consequences, mapping potential futures like a chess player. Alexandra was in trouble, the kind that destroyed careers and lives with equal efficiency. The pregnancy test proved she was vulnerable to whoever held power over her marriage, business empire, carefully constructed public image. But vulnerability could be weaponized by the right person at the right time. Lucas had learned that lesson through bitter experience, watched his own exposure be turned against him by corporate lawyers who specialized in destroying whistleblowers' credibility. The question now was whether Alexandra's secrets would be her salvation or her downfall, and what role he was meant to play in determining the outcome. The afternoon shift was arriving as he returned to the building, their fresh uniforms and energetic chatter a stark contrast to his own exhaustion. Lucas nodded to the day supervisor and headed for the service elevator, intending to retrieve supplies from basement storage. But as the elevator descended, he noticed an extra passenger, Richard Hayes Morrison, Alexandra's husband, looking harried and dangerous in his perfectly tailored suit. "Excuse me." Richard's voice carried the entitled authority of someone accustomed to immediate compliance. "You're part of the cleaning crew?" "Yes, sir." Lucas kept his eyes fixed on elevator buttons, playing the part of deferential employee. "You were here this morning when my wife had a accident?" The word accident dripped with skepticism, as if Richard suspected something more complicated than simple misfortune. Lucas nodded carefully, offering nothing more than basic confirmation. "Did you see anything unusual? Anyone who shouldn't have been there?" The pregnancy test pressed against Lucas's ribs like evidence in a murder trial. Richard's questions felt less like concern for his wife's welfare, and more like intelligence gathering, as if he were assembling a case rather than seeking reassurance. Lucas had encountered men like Richard before, corporate predators who viewed human relationships as assets to be managed. "Just found her unconscious by her desk, sir." Security and paramedics handled everything from there. Richard studied Lucas's face with cold calculation, searching for deception or hidden knowledge. The elevator reached the basement with a mechanical ding, and Lucas stepped out immediately, eager to escape that predatory scrutiny. But Richard's voice followed him into the hallway. "If you remember anything else, anything at all, I want to hear about it immediately." Lucas nodded without turning around, walking steadily toward the storage room while feeling Richard's gaze burn between his shoulder blades. The storage room was his sanctuary, fluorescent lit, smelling of industrial cleaner and honest work. Lucas pulled out his phone and stared at Alexandra's business card, her private number written in elegant script across expensive cardstock. He thought about the frightened woman in the hospital bed, about the pregnancy test hidden in his pocket, about the predatory calculation in her husband's eyes. 20 years ago, in Professor Martinez's classroom, they'd studied case after case of ethical dilemmas in corporate America. Now he was living one, and textbook answers seemed inadequate for the complexity of real-world moral choices. His phone buzzed with a text from Zoe's babysitter. "Doctor moved tomorrow's appointment to today at 4 p.m. Can you make it?" Lucas checked his watch, 2:30. If he left now, he could make his daughter's appointment and be back for his night shift. But leaving early meant questions from supervisors, meant drawing attention he couldn't afford. The custody hearing was 3 weeks away, and any sign of unreliability could tip scales in his ex-wife's favor. But Zoe needed him. She always needed him, would always need him, and that need was the true north of his moral compass, regardless of corporate games swirling around him. The pediatric wing felt different from the executive floors where Alexandra recovered in silk-wrapped comfort. Here, walls were painted with cartoon characters and inspirational sayings, designed to make children forget they were afraid, and parents forget they were helpless. Zoe sat on an examination table, swinging her legs and chattering about her third-grade teacher's new pet hamster. "Daddy!" She launched herself at him with fearless enthusiasm of someone who'd never doubted her father's love. "You're here." Mrs. Patterson said you might not make it because of work. Lucas held her tight, breathing in the scent of grape shampoo and elementary school cafeteria food. "Wouldn't miss it for the world, kiddo. How are you feeling?" "Good. Dr. Williams says my incision is healing perfectly, and I can start swimming lessons next month if I want." She beamed up at him with gap-toothed pride. "Are you proud of me, Daddy?" "Every single day." He meant it completely, this truth that needed no embellishment or strategic calculation. Whatever games he played in the corporate world above, whatever compromises he made for survival, this love was pure and simple and absolutely honest. Dr. Williams confirmed what Zoe had reported. Healing was progressing beautifully, no complications, no concerns about her return to full activities. The appointment took 20 minutes and cost $300, money Lucas didn't have but would find somehow because his daughter's health wasn't negotiable. He'd learned to juggle payment plans and credit cards like a financial acrobat, keeping all plates spinning through sheer force of paternal will. On the drive back to the babysitter's house, Zoe chatted about school and friends and the book she was reading about a girl who solved mysteries with her pet dog. "Daddy, can I ask you something?" Zoe's voice carried the serious tone she reserved for important conversations. "Always. When I grow up, will I be as brave as you?" The question hit him like a physical blow. In his daughter's eyes, he was a hero. The man who'd sacrificed his career to protect innocent people, who cleaned buildings at night so she could have a home and food and medical care when she needed it. She didn't see failure or compromise or daily compromises required for survival. She saw love in action, integrity made manifest through sacrifice. "You're already braver than me," he said, and meant it. "Every day you choose to be kind when other kids are mean. Every day you tell the truth when lying would be easier. Every day you stand up for people who can't stand up for themselves. That's real courage. The rest is just details." That evening, back at Morrison Holdings, Lucas moved through his assigned floors with mechanical precision while his mind churned through possibilities. The building felt different after dark, less corporate theater, more honest in its emptiness. Night shifts belonged to people like him, the invisible army who kept the machine running while executives slept. Around midnight, his phone buzzed with an unknown number. He almost ignored it, but something made him answer. "Lucas?" Alexandra's voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry to call so late." I couldn't sleep. He stepped into an empty conference room, closing the door behind him. "Are you all right? Do you need medical attention?" "No, nothing like that. I keep thinking about this morning. About what you did for me." A pause, heavy with unspoken implications. "I think we need to talk. Really talk." Lucas stared out at the city lights. 42 floors of vertical distance between ground level and corporate heights, where deals were made and lives changed with casual efficiency. "Mrs. Hayes Morrison. Alexandra, please." Her voice carried vulnerability he remembered from 20 years ago, when she'd been Alex Rodriguez, and the world had seemed full of possibility rather than compromise. "I know this is strange, calling you like this. But I can't shake the feeling that you understand something the others don't. Something important." The pregnancy test seemed to burn against his chest. 2 pink lines that represented hope or disaster depending on perspective. Room 415. Conference room on the 41st floor. Can you meet me there in 20 minutes? Yes. No hesitation. No questions about propriety or corporate protocol. Just simple acceptance of a strange invitation from a man she almost remembered, in a building where secrets accumulated like dust in forgotten corners. 20 minutes later, Alexandra Hayes Morrison stepped out of the executive elevator wearing jeans and a Northwestern University sweatshirt, looking more like the idealistic graduate student she'd once been than the corporate powerhouse she'd become. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, face free of makeup. Lucas waited by conference room windows, still wearing his maintenance uniform, but somehow feeling less like a janitor and more like the MBA graduate he'd been in another lifetime. The city sprawled below them, millions of people living their own versions of compromise and courage, success and failure. 20 years. Alexandra's voice was soft, wondering. Professor Martinez's business ethics class. You sat 3 seats behind me and always asked the questions that made everyone else uncomfortable. You remember. I never forgot. How could I forget the boy who stood up in front of 200 students and argued that corporations had moral obligations that transcended profit margins? She moved to stand beside him at the window, close enough that he could smell her perfume. Something expensive but understated, designed to suggest power rather than advertise it. What happened to that boy, Lucas? What happened to the man who was going to change corporate America from the inside? Lucas reached into his pocket and withdrew the pregnancy test, placing it on the conference table between them, like evidence in a trial where they were both defendant and jury. Alexandra's breath caught, her composure cracking just enough to reveal the frightened woman underneath. I tried to change things from the inside, he said quietly. Turns out the inside doesn't want to be changed. It has antibodies designed to reject foreign elements like ethics and accountability. I learned that lesson the hard way. Alexandra stared at the pregnancy test as if it were a loaded weapon. Where did you find this? Your bag this morning. It was mixed in with everything else when you fell. Lucas kept his voice neutral, non-judgmental. The question isn't where I found it. The question is what you're going to do about it. Tears gathered in her eyes, the first genuine emotion he'd seen from her since the hospital room. It's not Richard's baby. I figured as much, based on his behavior today. He's looking for leverage against you, isn't he? Something to use in whatever game he's playing. Alexandra laughed bitterly, wiping tears away with the back of her hand. The Morrison Holdings merger, $12 billion in potential revenue, 3,000 jobs on the line, and my marriage is the linchpin holding it all together. Richard's family controls 45% of the voting shares. If our marriage fails, if there's any hint of scandal, the deal collapses and a lot of people lose everything. Corporate America ran on perception as much as performance, and personal scandals could destroy business empires with devastating efficiency. Who's the father? Does it matter? But even as she said it, her hand moved instinctively to her portfolio, protective and revealing at the same time. It matters if he's someone Richard can use against you. It matters if he's someone who can help protect you. Lucas paused, studying her face. It matters if he's someone you love. Alexandra closed her eyes, and for a moment she looked exactly like the 22-year-old graduate student who'd believed businesses could change the world for the better. His name is David Chen. Dr. David Chen. We were We were together in college. Before Richard. Before all of this. She gestured around the conference room as if the corporate trappings represented everything she'd compromised to achieve. We ran into each other 6 months ago at a medical conference. Richard was supposed to be there, but he cancelled at the last minute. Business emergency. There are always business emergencies when you're building an empire on other people's sacrifices. David and I started talking. Just talking at first. About college, about dreams we'd abandoned, about the people we'd been before we became the people we thought we needed to be. Her voice grew softer, more vulnerable. He's exactly the same. Still idealistic, still believes medicine should be about healing rather than profit margins. Still makes me remember who I used to be. Lucas understood the implications immediately. David Chen represented everything Alexandra had given up in her climb to corporate power authenticity, idealism, the possibility of love unmarked by strategic calculation. He also represented the kind of scandal that could destroy her carefully constructed empire if revealed at the wrong time to the wrong people. Richard knows. Suspects. He's had me followed for the past month. Private investigators, phone records, credit card statements. He's building a case. Alexandra opened her portfolio and withdrew a manila folder. Divorce papers, already drawn up, already signed on his end. All he needs is proof of infidelity, and he can destroy me completely. Lucas flipped through the documents, recognizing the language of legal warfare designed to strip someone of everything they'd worked to build. Richard wasn't just seeking divorce. He was seeking total victory, complete destruction of his wife's reputation and fortune. The settlement terms were brutal. No alimony, no corporate assets, no custody of any children born during the marriage. He doesn't know about the pregnancy yet. No. But if he finds out, if he can prove the baby isn't his— Alexandra's voice trailed off, the implications too horrible to speak aloud. He'll use it to destroy you and take control of Morrison Holdings completely. Lucas set the folder aside and studied Alexandra's face. Unless we don't let him. We? Surprise and hope warred in her voice. Lucas, you don't understand what you're risking. Richard Hayes Morrison has more money than some small countries. He owns judges, senators, entire media organizations. He'll try to destroy me the same way he's trying to destroy you. Lucas shrugged, the gesture carrying 20 years of hard-won wisdom about the price of ethical choices. The thing is, Alex, I've already been destroyed once. Lost my career, my marriage, my financial security. You know what I learned? It's liberating. When you've got nothing left to lose, you're free to do the right thing without calculating the cost. Alexandra stared at him, as if seeing him clearly for the first time. You're talking about fighting back. I'm talking about protecting what matters. Your baby, your future. How? Richard has resources, connections, lawyers who specialize in destroying people like us. Lucas smiled, and for the first time in 2 years, it reached his eyes. Richard has money and power, but we have something he's forgotten how to value. We have the truth. And sometimes, if you're smart enough and brave enough and lucky enough, the truth is the only weapon you need. Over the next 3 hours, they planned like generals preparing for war. Lucas shared everything he'd learned during 2 years of invisible observation, which executives were loyal to Alexandra versus Richard, which board members had skeletons in their own closets. Alexandra provided the insider perspective, the understanding of corporate politics and financial structures that Lucas's maintenance position couldn't reveal. By 4 a.m., They had the framework of a strategy that was either brilliant or suicidal, depending on your appetite for risk. The plan required perfect timing, absolute secrecy, and the kind of moral courage that had driven them both to this moment of strange collaboration between a disgraced executive and a pregnant CEO who'd forgotten how to believe in happy endings. "There's one more thing," Alexandra said as dawn began to lighten the sky beyond the conference room windows. "David doesn't know about the pregnancy yet. I was going to tell him this weekend. Will he stand by you? When Richard comes after you with everything he's got, when the media turns your personal life into public entertainment, when it costs him his own career and reputation, will he stay?" Alexandra's smile was soft, genuine, touched with the kind of hope Lucas recognized from his own relationship with Zoe Love, without conditions, commitment without calculations. He's exactly the kind of man who would have sat in Professor Martinez's classroom and argued that doing the right thing was more important than doing the profitable thing. As Alexandra gathered her portfolio and prepared to leave, Lucas made one final request. "There's something I need you to do for me. A favor that might seem unrelated to everything else we've discussed." "Anything." "I have a custody hearing in 3 weeks. My ex-wife is trying to prove I'm unfit to raise my daughter because I'm just a janitor with a criminal record for corporate whistleblowing." Lucas met her eyes steadily. "I need a character reference from someone respectable, someone whose word carries weight in family court." Alexandra's expression shifted from surprise to understanding, to something that might have been pride. "You're protecting your daughter the same way you protected me this morning? The same way you're protecting me now? Children see through adult deceptions easier than we think. Zoe knows her father is a good man, regardless of what job he does or what uniform he wears. But judges and lawyers and child welfare investigators need different kinds of proof. You'll have your reference letter by Friday. And Lucas?" Alexandra paused at the conference room door. "When this is all over, I'm going to offer you a job. Corporate ethics consulting. Corporate ethics consulting, helping businesses remember that profit and principle don't have to be mutually exclusive." She smiled, and for a moment the years fell away completely. "We're going to change the world from the inside, exactly like we planned." After she left, Lucas sat alone, watching sunrise paint the city in shades of gold and possibility. The pregnancy test lay on the table like a bridge spanning 20 years of separate journeys that had led them back to each other. Outside, millions of people were waking up to face their own versions of ethical choice and moral compromise. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of careful preparation and mounting tension. Lucas maintained his night shift routine while secretly gathering evidence they would need to expose Richard's corporate machinations. Alexandra continued her executive responsibilities while preparing for the battle that would determine not just her future, but the fate of everyone who depended on Morrison Holdings for their livelihoods. David Chen proved to be exactly the man Alexandra had described, a pediatric surgeon whose moral compass pointed as steadily north as Lucas's own, who received news of his impending fatherhood with joy unmarked by strategic calculation. The custody hearing arrived like a storm front that had been building on Lucas's personal horizon for months. Sarah, his ex-wife, looked polished and confident beside her new husband, a successful surgeon who could provide the kind of stability that family courts valued, above more ephemeral qualities like love and moral courage. Their lawyer painted a picture of Lucas as a well-meaning but irresponsible dreamer whose commitment to abstract principles had cost him everything that mattered. But Alexandra's character reference letter was devastating in its eloquence and specificity. She described Lucas as a man of unimpeachable integrity, whose willingness to sacrifice his own interests for the welfare of others made him exactly the kind of father any child would be fortunate to have. She detailed his work ethic, his reliability, his unwavering commitment to his daughter's welfare, even in the face of financial hardship. More importantly, she'd brought David with her as a witness doctor. David Chen, whose testimony about Lucas's character and parenting capabilities carried the weight of medical authority and moral credibility. Between them, they painted a picture of a father whose love for his daughter transcended any temporary professional difficulties. When Zoe herself was called to speak with the family court counselor, her testimony was simple and devastating. She wanted to live with her daddy because he was the smartest, bravest, kindest person she knew, and she felt safe with him in ways that had nothing to do with money or houses or suburban stability. The judge's decision was unanimous. Custody would remain with Lucas, with regular visitation for Sarah. As they left the courthouse, Zoe threw her arms around her father's waist and whispered, "I told you you were a hero, Daddy." But the real battle was just beginning. Richard Hayes Morrison had spent 3 weeks building his case against Alexandra, and his attack came with the coordinated precision of a military campaign. Private investigators provided photographs of Alexandra and David together, phone records that documented their relationship, medical records that confirmed her pregnancy. The divorce filing hit the news like a precision strike, designed to destroy her reputation and corporate standing simultaneously. The Morrison Holdings board meeting was scheduled for a Friday morning, with Richard's allies positioning themselves to remove Alexandra from her CEO position based on the moral turpitude clause in her contract. It was corporate warfare at its most ruthless, personal destruction weaponized for business advantage. But Lucas and Alexandra had prepared for this moment with the thoroughness of people who understood exactly what they were risking. The evidence they'd assembled over 3 weeks painted a picture of Richard Hayes Morrison as a corporate criminal who'd used his position to embezzle funds, manipulate stock prices, and cover up safety violations that had endangered thousands of workers. The morning of the board meeting, Lucas arrived at Morrison Holdings dressed in the only suit he owned, the same one he'd worn to his custody hearing. Alexandra met him in the lobby, looking every inch the CEO who'd built an empire through intelligence and determination rather than inheritance and intimidation. "Ready?" she asked, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were attempting. "Ready," Lucas confirmed. "Let's go change corporate America from the inside." The boardroom was packed with executives, lawyers, and financial analysts who'd gathered to witness what they expected to be Alexandra's professional execution. Richard sat at the head of the table like a king preparing to claim his rightful throne, surrounded by allies who'd already calculated the benefits of his victory. But Alexandra Hayes Morrison had learned something over 20 years of corporate warfare that Richard had never understood. The most devastating attacks often came from directions your enemies never considered. When she stood to address the board, she wasn't defending herself against charges of infidelity and moral failure. She was presenting evidence of criminal activity that would destroy Richard completely, while positioning herself as the ethical leader Morrison Holdings needed to survive the coming storm. The vote was unanimous. Richard Hayes Morrison was removed as CFO and expelled from the board, facing immediate criminal charges for embezzlement and securities fraud. 6 months later, Lucas Bennett stood in his new office on the 39th floor of Morrison Holdings, looking out at the city where he'd once cleaned floors and hidden his MBA certificate behind his daughter's photograph. The nameplate on his door read, Director of Corporate Ethics, and his first major assignment was developing employee protections for whistleblowers who risked their careers to expose corporate wrongdoing. Zoe visited him every afternoon after school, doing homework at the small conference table while he reviewed ethics protocols and compliance procedures. She'd adapted to their new circumstances with the resilience children display when they feel secure in their parents' love, treating his corporate office like an extension of their cramped apartment, a place where important work happened, where problems got solved, where her father continued to be her hero regardless of what building he worked in or what title appeared on his business cards. Alexandra's baby was born on a Tuesday morning in spring, with David beside her in the delivery room and a future stretching ahead unmarked by the compromises and calculations that had defined her previous life. She named her daughter Sophia Martinez Hayes Chen, honoring both the professor who'd taught them to believe in ethical business practices and the father whose love had given her the courage to choose principle over profit. The Morrison Holdings annual report that year included a new section on corporate social responsibility, detailing the company's commitment to ethical practices, employee welfare, and environmental stewardship. Wall Street analysts initially worried that such policies would hurt the bottom line, but the opposite proved true. Companies with reputations for integrity attracted better employees, more loyal customers, and more stable long-term growth. On the anniversary of that morning when Alexandra had collapsed in her office, Lucas found himself back in Professor Martinez's classroom, not as a student this time, but as a guest speaker addressing a new generation of MBA candidates about the intersection of business success and moral courage. The students listened with the same hungry idealism he remembered from his own graduate years, asking the same challenging questions that had made him uncomfortable decades earlier. The most important thing you'll learn in business school, he told them, looking out at faces full of ambition and possibility, isn't how to maximize profits. It's how to recognize the moments when you'll be asked to choose between what's profitable and what's right, and how to choose right even when it costs everything. After his lecture, a young woman approached him with questions about corporate whistleblowing and the practical challenges of maintaining ethical standards in competitive industries. Her name was Jennifer Walsh, and she reminded him of Alexandra at that age, brilliant, idealistic, convinced she could change the world if she just worked hard enough and believed strongly enough in the power of principled business practices. Dr. Bennett, she said, using the title he'd earned through experience rather than additional education. How do you know when it's worth risking everything? How do you know when the cost of staying silent becomes higher than the cost of speaking truth? Lucas thought about Alexandra collapsing in her office, about Zoe asking whether she'd be as brave as her father, about all the moments when ethical choice felt like stepping off a cliff into darkness with nothing but faith to break the fall. You'll know, he said finally. When the moment comes, you'll know. As he drove home that evening, Lucas reflected on the strange currents that had brought him full circle from idealistic student to disgraced whistleblower to corporate ethics officer. The path hadn't been straight, hadn't been easy, hadn't followed any career plan he could have imagined at 22, but it had led him exactly where he needed to be, not just professionally, but personally, morally, spiritually. Zoe was waiting for him in their new apartment, homework spread across the kitchen table, chattering excitedly about a science project involving sustainable energy and environmental responsibility. At 9 years old, she already understood concepts that many adults spent lifetimes avoiding. That success without principle was hollow, that wealth without ethics was poverty, that the most important victories were often invisible to everyone except the people whose lives they touched. "Daddy," she said as he helped her with calculations for solar panel efficiency, "Mrs. Rodriguez says you and Ms. Alexandra are famous for changing how businesses work. She says you're making companies be nicer to people." Lucas smiled, thinking about the long journey from Professor Martinez's classroom to this kitchen table conversation about corporate responsibility. "We're trying, kiddo." Change happens slowly, one decision at a time, one company at a time. Are you proud of what you do? The question was simple, direct, carrying none of the complexity that adults layered onto discussions of career satisfaction and professional achievement. Lucas thought about his answer carefully, wanting to give his daughter truth rather than platitudes. "I'm proud that when you grow up, you'll inherit a business world that's a little more honest, a little more fair, a little more committed to doing the right thing even when it's difficult." He paused, studying her face with its expression of complete trust and unconditional love. "I'm proud that you'll never have to choose between being successful and being good, because we're proving every day that you can be both." That night, after Zoe was asleep, Lucas sat on their apartment balcony looking out at the city lights. Millions of people living their own versions of ethical choice and moral compromise, their own struggles between principle and pragmatism. His phone buzzed with a text from Alexandra. Board approved the new whistleblower protection program. We did it. They had done it, changed corporate America from the inside, exactly as they'd dreamed 20 years earlier. Not completely, not permanently, but meaningfully. They'd proved that businesses could prioritize people over profits, that success didn't require the sacrifice of integrity, that the idealistic students they'd once been had been right about the possibility of principled prosperity. But the real victory wasn't measured in policy changes or corporate reform initiatives. It was measured in the 9-year-old girl sleeping peacefully in the next room, secure in her father's love and proud of his work. It was measured in the baby girl who would grow up in a world where corporate ethics wasn't an oxymoron, where business leaders were expected to serve all stakeholders rather than just shareholders. It was measured in moments like this, quiet, unremarkable, invisible to everyone, except the people whose lives had been touched by the ripple effects of moral courage, made manifest through daily choices, small acts of integrity, the stubborn insistence that right and wrong mattered even in boardrooms and corner offices. Lucas closed his eyes and listened to the city breathing around him. Somewhere among those dreams were future business leaders who would face their own moments of ethical choice, their own tests of moral courage, their own opportunities to choose between what was profitable and what was right. And when those moments came, when the next generation stood at the crossroads between principle and pragmatism, they would find a business world that had been changed, one ethical decision at a time, by people who'd believed that corporate America could be reformed from the inside by those brave enough to insist that it should be.